guys, welcome to my kitchen. I'm gonna work on some things today that go along with our hydration video. So if you haven't watched the hydration video yet, go ahead and go back and watch that, and I will try to link it up around there somewhere, so you can just click on it. What we're doing today is lemon water, and this is how I do it. You don't have to do it this way, but it'll, give you a starting point. And then also I'm going to demonstrate how to make kombucha for those of you that are interested in doing that. We'll talk about it in a couple weeks, and you'll have it all ready to go if you start it now. So for the lemon water, I use a glass jar. These are really easy to come by, and they're just really handy, and it makes a good amount. So I keep this on hand for a couple weeks, or sorry, a couple days. This is a couple days worth of water for me and the kids. So I can just put it in the fridge that way. So I try to get organic lemons because we are going to be using the peel. Usually with oranges and lemons and things, I don't worry too much about them being organic because that thick peel, so the pesticides aren't really in the fruit as much. So I'm just going to take and juice, and this is my little juicer, I'm going to just juice both halves. I'm going to throw them both in the water with the peel. There are some other recipes that you can get on Pinterest too for electrolyte waters that I just really love during the summertime. And they would be things like lemon and lime and a little bit of salt that we talked about, and a little bit of honey, because honey actually does have minerals in it also. So this is kind of hard to do at an angle like this, but I don't want to like cover up and turn my back on you guys. So just get as much of the juice out as you can. And oh, if you don't have a juicer, there's another method that you can use, is just take a spoon and just kind of squish it with the spoon, which it's not quite as easy, but that works too. Some people just squeeze it. I don't have a whole lot of strength to do that, so I use my little thing. So I'm going to throw the peel in. Juice the other half. While I'm juicing this, I do want to mention that my camera cut me off in the hydration video, so I didn't really get to explain the salts very well. I mentioned that I put a couple grains of salt in my water, but I did want to point out that that has to be a good quality sea salt. You don't want to use table salt. If that's all you had, you maybe could, but I really wouldn't recommend it. This is just going in here. So I use filtered water in this because we don't want to be drinking chlorine. And then I just fill it to the top and let that sit for maybe a couple hours. And then I will take the peel out after a couple hours because the peel will make it bitter if it sits in there for a couple days. But that's all I do, and then I find my lid. Oh, it's over here. Okay, just put a lid on it, put it in the fridge. I don't drink it cold though. Usually what I do is I'll drink this in the morning before breakfast because it'll help your digestion. I'll kind of prepare your stomach and wake it up for the day. But I heat it up in a little pan on the stove just to, like tea or something, just to warm it up. And if you want, you can even put a little bit of lemon in it, or a little bit of honey in it, just to sweeten it up. It's like warm lemon juice. That's really good for colds too, and if you got a cough or something. But that's what I do. So I was talking about the salt. That's going to go in the fridge later. These are the salts that I use. This is the Himalayan pink salt. I actually have a grinder with, it's got the large, I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it's got a little grinder on top, so you flip it over and grind it. And then I have this Alea salt, and I'm not sure if you can tell how coarse that is, but that's the one that I put maybe 5 grains in, because it's fairly coarse, kind of large grains. But these mined salts, rather than being just like seawater that they take the salt out of, these ones have been mined from ancient salt beds, and they have more of the trace minerals that we talked about, the electrolytes with So we talked about that they needed to be balanced. There's the sodium, potassium, magnesium, all the different trace minerals. With table salt, you just have the sodium and chloride. Sodium and chloride in table salt, which isn't balanced. So these actually have less sodium and more of the other trace minerals besides the chloride. So these also have magnesium, potassium, calcium in it to balance out the sodium. So that's what I wanted to make sure you guys understood, why we're using the good quality salts if you are going to put some in your water. So now we're going to move on to kombucha. This will take a couple of weeks for the kombucha to be ready, so that's why we're starting it now. I have a batch over here. Try not to turn my back on you. So this is my kombucha that's been sitting in the cupboard for, a week and a half, and I put the date on it so I could tell when it started and when it might be finished. Kombucha has to stay warm. 80 degrees would be ideal, but most people don't keep their house at 80 degrees. So in the summertime, I put mine out in the garage, and it just brews faster when it's warmer, and the heat keeps it from molding. So warmer is better, but if you don't have an 80-degree spot in your house, I put it up above my stove in a cupboard, but you have to leave the cupboard door cracked because you also need circulation. That's why I just have a cloth over it rather than a lid. Because you want the good bacteria, the beneficial bacteria, to be able to get in through the cloth to help populate the kombucha. So we're going to kind of do this backwards because I kind of constantly have kombucha brewing. So I will strain this one off and then put a new batch in. So this is one that's ready to go, and here's how I figure out whether it's ready or not. I get a little straw. Take off my cloth. This is the SCOBY up at the top here, if you can see that. So I just stick the straw in and put my finger over the top and get a little bit in my little cute little A&W cup there. And after about a week or so, depending on how warm it is in your house, you can start tasting it to determine when it's ready. So let's see. Okay, so that's a little bit sweet still, which I usually would let it brew a little longer. But for the sake of the video, this is when I'm making the video. So we're going to go ahead and strain it anyway, even though it could go a little longer. So here's what I forgot to get out. Every time you strain it, you do need to save some kombucha with the SCOBY to keep the SCOBY alive. And I'm actually going to save 2 batches worth because the SCOBY will divide also, and I have someone that wants one. So I'm going to separate them and save one for each of us. So you're going to make sure you have clean hands. I washed my hands before we started. Keep all your jars and implements clean because you don't want to introduce bad bacteria into your kombucha that would make it mold or anything. Actually, let me mention while I'm doing this that I'm also getting the water hot to start the next batch. So it's almost there. I'm going to give it another minute to get boiling. And actually, maybe I'll push this to the side and talk about the next batch because it's almost ready. Okay, so the next batch, as I'm straining this, it's going to be steeping. So we're going to get 10 tea bags for a gallon size. This is a gallon. This would be a half gallon. You can do half gallons if you want, in which case you would just do 5 tea bags. But for a gallon, it's 10 tea bags, and I've got a gallon of water in my pan there. And as soon as it boils, I'm going to put those in and steep them just like you would tea. So it's no more difficult than making tea. And I kind of wind the strings together to make it easier to get out. You can use... Okay, sorry about that, guys. My camera shuts off after 10 minutes for some reason, so I'm hoping I didn't cut off anything important. And if you're wondering, this is what I have for a microphone, so that's why I'm not like listening to music and ignoring you guys. So while the camera was shut off, besides getting a package delivery, the water boiled. I went ahead and put my tea bags in there, and I just clip them to the side just to get them out more easily. So that's going to steep, and I actually forgot to set the timer. I'm going to set the timer for about 4 minutes is plenty. Okay, and while that's steeping, now I can come over here and strain out my kombucha. So I'm going to set my SCOBY in a bowl so I can measure out the right amount. So for a 1 gallon container of kombucha, you need to save 2 cups. If you were going to just do a half gallon, you could do 1 cup. So this is the SCOBY. It's round just because it fits the shape of the container. And it's actually, there's 2 of them here. You can see it just splits right apart. And it looks disgusting and slimy and gross, but it actually is a good thing. There's beneficial bacteria in there. So I'm going to separate them, and then I'm going to pour out, and I usually use a strainer just because sometimes there's little bits of things that I just don't like. So they're not pretty. Usually I would do this over the sink, but for today, so you guys can see it, I'm just going to put a towel down and do it on the counter. Put that back here. Okay, so I'm just going to strain off 2 cups for each of the SCOBYs. And it will get kind of fizzy as you're straining it. That's okay. Okay, there's 1, and I'm going to put the SCOBY back in it. And this is how you would keep your SCOBY in between. Like if you didn't want to make another batch immediately, you could put this in a jar, or I've put it in a Ziploc bag or something like that, and just keep it in the fridge. You could potentially keep it on the counter. I read somewhere that some people do, but my thinking is that once it runs out of food, which is the sugar that you put in it, then it's going to, the SCOBY would actually die if it runs out of food. So I like to put it in the fridge because that kind of makes the SCOBY dormant and it won't die on you that way. So now I'm ready to strain off the kombucha. Now, this next step is not essential. I'm going to flavor my kombucha. So I've got 2 jars here. You can do all kinds of different flavors, whatever sounds good to you. And that's another thing. I went and looked at the store and looked at what kinds of things they used, and I went on Pinterest, and there's recipes all over Pinterest for kombucha flavorings. So this one I actually got off of Pinterest, and it is apples. Since it's fall, I figured that would be good. And I already diced up the apples. They're just little minced apples, if you can see that. And then, since they're all the same thing, I'm doing half a gallon and a quart. Usually I strain into quarts, and I just do 4 quarts since I have a gallon. And it doesn't quite get filled up since I strained some off already. But then also I'm going to crunch up some cinnamon. So this is going to be a cinnamon apple kombucha. Oh, see if I can break this. Okay, so I'm going to break a little bit in this one. And yes, you wouldn't really eat cinnamon like this, but this is all going to get strained off. So you don't have to worry about getting chunks of cinnamon in your drink. Okay, so that's telling me that this is done. So I'm just going to pull these bags out. I'm going to drain a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and put in a cup of sugar. Now, you're going to wonder why on earth I'm telling you put sugar in this, because I just told you not to drink sugary drinks, right? The sugar that goes into this actually is feeding the bacteria. So it's not going to be there by the time, I'm going to do it over here so it doesn't spill. So by the time this kombucha is ready to drink, the bacteria will have eaten all the sugar, and there's not really more than a trace left for you. So I'm going to just give that a little stir to dissolve the sugar. Now this has to sit until it's cooled off enough that it's not going to kill the SCOBY when you put it in. So we will probably have to come back to this a little bit later. Once the sugar is dissolved, I'm just going to set it aside, and it might take a couple of hours, so it'll be a while before we get back to that. So while that's doing that thing, I'm also going to add just a pinch of nutmeg. It's just going to make it kind of apple pie flavor. And speaking of pinches of things, when I mentioned putting a pinch of salt in your water bottle, I'm talking a tiny pinch. So all we do now is pour the kombucha into the jars. And then we're going to set these on the counter for 2 or 3 days. And it's going to get fizzy here. And I usually just put it in like a dark spot. Kombucha does like it to be dark. I didn't mention that earlier. That's why I put it in a cupboard up high where the heat, heat rises. So it's a little warmer up near the ceiling. But it also likes the dark. So if you, whoa, making a mess. If you are going to leave it set out on a counter or something, I would suggest maybe wrapping a blanket or something around the glass part so that it keeps it dark in there. I suppose you could find dark jars, I'm not sure, but now I mentioned earlier too that this step is not essential. You do not have to flavor your kombucha. You could just strain it and drink it like this and just have plain kombucha. But I like the flavored stuff, so I pretty much flavor all of mine. My current favorite is blueberry vanilla, but I ran out of blueberries, so I wasn't able to do that for you guys today. But use whatever flavorings you like. You can use juice. I like to use the real fruit, but juice is acceptable too. It's gonna be, you'll have a little more sugars in it if you add juice. And speaking of that, the reason that I did not really recommend kombucha as a hydrating drink is because it's not pure water. We were talking about drinking pure water, but it does have calories to it. It has yeasts, and it has a little bit of sugars, especially if you flavor it with fruits. That'll add a little bit of sugars. It's not like drinking fruit juice or totally sweetened juices, but for now, for your hydrating, you don't really want to use kombucha as part of your hydrating routine. This would be an extra for the probiotics, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so this is strained enough. I'll probably just drink the rest of that because it's not going to fit so well. We're back. I took a little break, had a little lunch, cleaned some things up, and that gave my tea enough time to cool off. So now I poured most of it into my jar. I'm going to put the SCOBY in. I had to leave some space because we do have a couple cups of kombucha from our last batch, and this is actually going to start this one going. So I'm just going to pour this in, and then I'll set the SCOBY in there so it doesn't splash. And now I have a little bit of space so I can pour some more of the tea in there until it's full. And you don't have to worry about the SCOBY sinking or anything because it will eventually float to the top on its own. Or it might stay on the bottom. It really doesn't matter where the SCOBY is in there. So now I got myself a clean, this is just a napkin that I have. It did get some kombucha on it, but it is clean. So you want kind of a coarse weave so the probiotics can get in, but the bugs can't. So we're just going to put that over there, put a rubber band over it, and this guy is going to go into a dark warm place. For me, it's a cupboard over my stove here that I leave open a crack. Remember, you do want air circulating around it. And that, I will write the date on it. In about a week, week and a half, I'll start testing this one, and I'll start another batch going. So that is kombucha. I hope that you guys try it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that when we get to the probiotic section, you guys will be ready to go with that. So thank you, and I will see you in the video next week. If you haven't watched the hydration video, go ahead and go back and watch that, and try and guess what next week's topic's going to be. I'll see you next week. Bye.